The morning sun was just beginning to warm the streets of Los Angeles. The sidewalks shimmered with a golden hue, and the buzz of life was already rising. People hurrying to work, the sound of traffic, and the scent of fresh coffee drifting from nearby cafes. Among the early walkers that day was Keanu Reeves, quietly making his way down a side street away from the main crowds. He had on a faded hoodie, an old pair of jeans, and boots that looked like they had seen better days. His hair was a bit longer than usual, his beard slightly untrimmed, and yet there was an easy calmness about him. He wasn't in a rush. In fact, Keanu rarely was. Fame hadn't changed his habits much over the years. He still liked walking instead of being driven everywhere, still stopped to talk to strangers, still believed in keeping life simple. That morning, though, he had one small plan in mind: to get a haircut. Nothing dramatic, just a trim. He had a few public events coming up and thought it was time to tidy up his look a little. He didn't have a personal stylist or a team of assistants making appointments for him like most big stars did. That was never his style. Instead, he preferred to walk into places on his own, quietly, like any regular person. It was part of what made him feel grounded. He wanted to see life as it was, not behind the walls of fame, but among everyday people. So as he passed by a row of shops, he noticed a beautiful glass front salon on the corner. Its windows gleamed, and inside the place looked like something out of a magazine. Marble floors, crystal mirrors, soft lighting, and a few customers being pampered in reclining chairs. The sign above the door was elegant, written in gold letters. It was clearly an expensive place. Keanu paused for a second and looked through the window. He smiled faintly to himself. He had been to plenty of high-end salons before, back when movie studios would send him for grooming before press tours. But this time it wasn't about being camera-ready. He just wanted a haircut, and something about the place drew him in. Maybe it was the calm music playing softly inside, or maybe he simply wanted to walk in somewhere unannounced and see what happened. He pushed open the door gently. A cool breeze from the air conditioning brushed against his face. The smell of expensive hair products and floral perfume filled the air. Inside, a few stylists were chatting quietly while working on their clients. A receptionist stood behind the front desk tapping on a tablet. She looked up as the door chimed, and for a split second she hesitated. Keanu gave a small smile and said, "Hi there, do you take walk-ins?" The receptionist blinked at him, her expression polite but uncertain. Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No, I don't," Keanu replied. "Just hoping for a simple haircut if there's time today." She looked him up and down. He didn't look like the usual clientele that walked into this kind of salon. The regulars were often people dressed in designer clothes, carrying luxury handbags, or wearing polished shoes. Keanu's hoodie looked old. His jeans had wrinkles, and he carried no bag, no assistant, no hint of wealth. Just a simple man asking for a haircut. The receptionist gave a tight smile. "Let me check," she said, glancing at her tablet, though she didn't really look at the schedule. Behind her, one of the stylists, a tall man with perfectly styled hair, whispered something to a colleague. They both looked toward the door where Keanu stood, and one of them gave a quiet chuckle. Keanu noticed the glances but didn't say anything. He just stood patiently, his hands tucked into his pockets, looking around at the decorations, the rows of hair products lined neatly on glass shelves, the gentle hum of hair dryers, the sound of laughter from the back corner. The receptionist finally looked up. "I'm sorry, sir. We're actually fully booked for the day," she said with a rehearsed tone. Keanu nodded slightly. "No problem," he said calmly. "Maybe another time." He started to turn toward the door when one of the stylists muttered just loud enough for the others to hear, "You'd think people would at least dress properly before walking into a place like this." Another stylist smirked. Keanu heard it. He didn't react. His face remained neutral, almost peaceful, as if he was used to such moments. Over the years, he had seen people treat others differently based on appearances. He never got used to it completely, but he learned not to take it personally. He was about to step outside when a voice called out from one of the chairs near the window. "Hey, that's Keanu Reeves." The voice belonged to a young man getting his hair colored. He had been scrolling through his phone but looked up just in time to recognize the face. The room went quiet for a moment. The stylist stopped mid-motion. The receptionist froze. The young man smiled. "Oh my God, you're Keanu Reeves." "I love your movies, man." Keanu smiled softly. Thanks, that's kind of you. The receptionist's eyes widened. She suddenly looked unsure, glancing between him and her tablet. The stylist who had made the earlier comment looked embarrassed. Oh, Mr. Reeves, the receptionist stammered. I didn't realize it was you. If you'd like, we can fit you in right now. I'll ask one of our senior stylists to take care of you immediately. Keanu shook his head gently. That's okay. I don't want to trouble anyone. It's no trouble at all, she insisted, her tone suddenly sweet. We'd be honored, really. He gave her a small, genuine smile, the kind that carried more humility than pride. I appreciate it, he said, but I think I'll pass. Have a good day. He turned and walked out into the sunlight, the door closing softly behind him. The people inside were left staring, their earlier laughter replaced by quiet disbelief. Outside, Keanu took a slow breath. He wasn't angry or upset. In truth, he had experienced far worse moments in life than being turned away from a fancy salon. What stayed with him, though, was how quickly kindness could turn into flattery the moment someone recognized a famous face. As he walked down the street, a few passers-by nodded or smiled at him, recognizing the humble movie star who was known not for his wealth but for his kindness. He smiled back at them, grateful for the small gestures that still felt genuine. He stopped at a small coffee stand and ordered a cup of black coffee. The man behind the counter didn't seem to recognize him either, but greeted him warmly anyway. Good morning, brother. You want sugar? No thanks, Keanu said, smiling. Just black is perfect. Coming right up. While waiting, Keanu leaned against the stand and watched people walking by. He noticed how differently they moved, some in a rush, some lost in their phones, some just enjoying the day. He thought about how strange fame could be. 1 minute, people overlook you. The next, they can't stop staring. But deep down, he knew that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was how people treated each other when no one was watching. The coffee vendor handed him the cup. Here you go, man. Thanks, Keanu said, slipping a few bills into the tip jar, more than enough to cover the drink. The vendor smiled. Hey, thank you. You're a good one, Keanu nodded. Take care, my friend. As he walked away, he passed another small salon, not as fancy as the first, but warm-looking, with plants in the window and a handwritten sign that said, Walk-ins welcome. He smiled to himself and decided to step inside. Inside, a woman behind the counter greeted him with a bright smile.
Hi there.
Can I help you? Yeah, Keanu said, smiling back. Just looking for a quick haircut, if that's okay. Of course. We've got time right now. Take a seat, I'll be with you in just a minute. No hesitation, no judgment, just kindness. He sat down, taking a moment to look around. The place wasn't luxurious. The mirrors were slightly worn and the chairs had a few scratches, but it felt real. The customers chatted easily with the stylists. Someone laughed loudly in the back. There was a sense of comfort that money couldn't buy. When the woman came over to cut his hair, she asked, So how short are we going today? Not too short, he said with a grin. Just need to tidy up a little. As she began snipping away, they talked about ordinary things. The weather, traffic, how coffee prices kept going up. She had no idea who he was, and Keanu didn't feel the need to tell her. He enjoyed just being another person in the chair. When she finished, she turned the mirror toward him. There we go. How's that look? Perfect, he said. You did a great job, she smiled. Glad to hear it. That'll be $25. Keanu reached into his pocket, handed her a $100 bill, and said, Keep the change. Her eyes widened. Are you sure? That's too much, he smiled softly. You were kind to me when I walked in. That's worth more than you think, the woman smiled back, not quite understanding why the quiet man's words felt so genuine. Keanu left the salon feeling lighter, not just because of the haircut, but because he'd been reminded once again that kindness, real kindness, had nothing to do with wealth or status. It was about simple respect. As he walked back toward his apartment, the luxury salon he had visited earlier came back to his mind. He didn't feel angry at them. Maybe they were just used to judging people by what they saw. Maybe they'd think twice the next time someone walked through the door who didn't look like they belonged. In the end, that was enough for him. He never wanted to embarrass anyone or make a scene. He simply believed that the best lessons people learn are the ones they discover on their own. That night, when he sat down on his balcony with a book and a cup of tea, the city lights twinkled below. Somewhere across town, the same luxury salon was closing for the evening. The staff probably still couldn't believe what had happened earlier, how they had turned away one of the world's most respected actors without even realizing who he was, but Keanu didn't need their apology. He already had what mattered most: peace of mind, a simple haircut, and a reminder that humility will always outshine pride. He smiled to himself, leaned back in his chair, and whispered under his breath, "It's just hair. It'll grow again." And with that, he turned the page of his book, letting the quiet night carry him into calm. The next few days passed quietly for Keanu. He kept up with his usual routine of going for long walks, stopping by his favorite coffee shops, and spending time with close friends who, unlike many others, treated him just like anyone else. Even though he had been in the public eye for decades, Keanu had learned a long time ago how to separate his on-screen identity from who he really was. He wasn't interested in being treated differently, yet what had happened at the salon stayed with him. It wasn't just the way he'd been turned away, but how the staff had acted once they realized who he was. They hadn't seen him first as a person, but as an appearance, something to be judged by the clothes he wore, the way he looked. It was a harsh reminder of how quickly people can dismiss someone based on surface-level assumptions. That night, after his usual walk, he sat down on the couch in his living room and thought about it some more. He realized that it wasn't the rejection that bothered him so much. He had been in situations before where he'd been judged unfairly, but what really stood out was how he had been treated once they thought he was someone important. It wasn't just about getting a haircut. It was about how quickly kindness turned to fawning, and how, in an instant, people could act like they'd been waiting their whole lives to meet a star. Keanu didn't feel like a star, though. To him, he was just a man who loved his craft, who worked hard, and who appreciated the simple joys of life, like sitting in a small cafe with a cup of coffee, talking to strangers, or enjoying a quiet evening at home. Fame had never been the focus for him. It was always about the work, about being kind to people, and about maintaining his integrity, no matter how many movies he made or how many awards he won. As he sat there, reflecting on the incident at the salon, Keanu made a decision. He wasn't going to let that moment of judgment define how he felt about people. He wouldn't let it sour his trust in others, but it did spark something inside him, a desire to remind people of the importance of seeing each other for who they really are, not just how they look or where they come from. The next morning, he decided to pay a visit to the luxury salon again. He didn't need another haircut. He didn't even want anything from them. He just wanted to speak to the staff, to have a quiet conversation. Maybe they had learned something from the way they treated him. Maybe they hadn't. Either way, Keanu knew it was time to share his thoughts. When he arrived, the salon was bustling, just as it had been the day before. This time he wore a simple t-shirt and jeans with no hoodie to cover his face. He walked in with the same unassuming demeanor as before. The receptionist was standing behind the desk, tapping on her tablet, just as she had the other day. She looked up at the sound of the door chiming. Her face immediately changed when she saw him. There was a flicker of recognition, then a moment of hesitation. She froze, staring at him for a few seconds before she quickly stood up. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't expect you to come back. Can I help you with something?" She stammered, clearly unsure of what to say next. Keanu smiled gently. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with one of the stylists. I just want to have a quick word." The receptionist blinked in surprise. "Of course, let me see who's available." She walked off quickly, returning a moment later with the same stylist who had made the remark about people dressing properly the day before. He looked more polished now, his hair styled perfectly, his shirt crisp. The stylist seemed more nervous than before, but he approached Keanu with a smile, trying to act casual. "Mr. Reeves, it's nice to see you again. How can I help you today?" Keanu nodded, his tone calm and friendly. "I just wanted to have a quick chat, if you don't mind. It's about yesterday." The stylist's face turned pale, and Keanu could see a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I know," the stylist said, lowering his voice. "I was out of line. I didn't know who you were when you walked in. I never should have said what I did." Keanu's expression softened. "It's okay," he said. "I wasn't offended. But I think it's important to talk about something. You know, a lot of people get judged by how they look. I'm sure you see it all the time here." The stylist nodded, his face a mix of embarrassment and understanding. Yeah, we do. I mean, we get people who come in here dressed to the nines with all the money in the world and we treat them like royalty. And then you walk in just like anyone else and I just assumed. Keanu smiled gently, understanding where the stylist was coming from. It's easy to judge people on how they look. But looks aren't everything, right? I mean, I'm just a guy who's been lucky enough to do what I love, but I'm still the same as anyone else. The stylist was silent for a moment, looking down at his shoes. I get it now, he said quietly. I feel pretty bad about what happened. Keanu gave him an encouraging nod. We all make mistakes. It's just important to learn from them. The stylist smiled, relieved. I'll do better, I promise. Keanu turned to the receptionist who had been quietly listening from a distance. And I'd like to thank you for your help, even if I didn't end up getting a haircut yesterday. The receptionist looked surprised. Oh, it's nothing, Mr. Reeves. We should have treated you better from the start. Keanu nodded. It's not about the haircut. It's about how we treat people. Everyone should be treated with kindness and respect no matter how they look or what they wear. That's what I believe. The receptionist smiled warmly, finally seeming at ease. Thank you for saying that. I think we all needed to hear it. Keanu gave them both a small smile. I just wanted to share a thought, and I know you're probably busy, so I'll let you get back to it. As he turned to leave, the stylist called out, Mr. Reeves, thank you. I won't forget this. Keanu glanced back over his shoulder, smiling. Good luck to you. Take care. He stepped out of the salon and into the bright afternoon light, feeling lighter himself. There was no sense of resentment, no lingering anger. In fact, he felt a sense of peace. Maybe the staff hadn't learned anything the day before, but now they understood something that was far more important than any haircut or fancy salon. They understood the power of humility and respect. Walking down the street, Keanu felt the familiar pull of the world around him. The noise, the rush of traffic, the chatter of people going about their day. It was all part of life, and as much as he loved his quiet moments, he knew that he would never be disconnected from the world. He was part of it, just like everyone else. That evening, as he sat down to a simple dinner at home, he thought about the day and the lesson that had come from it. It wasn't about confronting people or calling them out. It was about gently reminding them of what really mattered. It wasn't the clothes or the fame. It was how you treated others, how you saw them, how you chose to recognize their humanity. And that, Keanu thought as he took a bite of his meal, was what really made a person stand out. The world could be a beautiful place when people took a moment to really see each other for who they truly were. And if he could remind just a few people of that, then maybe the world would be a little kinder for it. A few days after the encounter at the salon, Keanu continued to go about his daily routine. The city of Los Angeles was buzzing around him as usual, but there was a subtle shift in how he viewed everything. The world felt a little different, like there was something in the air that wasn't there before. Maybe it was the small conversation he had with the stylist and receptionist, or maybe it was just the reminder of how powerful kindness could be when it was shown at the right moment. One thing that Keanu had always believed in was the idea of quiet acts of change. He didn't need to make grand speeches or cause dramatic scenes to make an impact. He just needed to be present, to be real. In a world where so much of life was fast-paced and surface level, Keanu believed that true connection could only be made when people slowed down, took a breath, and really saw each other. Over the next week, the story of what had happened at the Salon started to ripple through social media. It wasn't Keanu who shared the details. He never really cared for the spotlight. It was an anonymous post from someone who had been there that day, someone who had witnessed the way Keanu had been treated and how he had handled it. The post quickly spread, drawing attention from fans, influencers, and even some of the staff members who had been present in the salon. At first, the post was just a small note, but as more people picked it up, it turned into something bigger. It wasn't about the celebrity angle. It was about the message. People started to realize how easily they made judgments about others based on things like clothes, appearance, and status. And in a time where superficiality often ruled, they saw how Keanu had remained grounded, unaffected by it all. The post mentioned how Keanu had quietly accepted the judgment, how he didn't raise his voice, and how he turned the situation into a lesson in humility. But the part that struck people the most was the way he didn't ask for anything. He didn't demand an apology. He didn't make the staff feel ashamed. He just gave them a chance to see things differently, to change their perspective. Some fans started commenting about how Keanu had always been known for his kindness and humility. Others shared their own stories about times when they had been judged based on their appearance or assumed to be something they weren't. The more people shared, the more Keanu's message about treating others with respect resonated. He had never been one to seek praise, but in the days that followed, Keanu couldn't help but feel a bit of warmth from the support he was receiving. It wasn't about him as an individual, but about the idea that maybe, just maybe, people were starting to rethink how they viewed others. One evening, after the story had gone viral, Keanu decided to take a walk to clear his mind. He found himself at a quiet park bench near his apartment, where he often came to reflect. It was one of those evenings where the sky was turning orange and pink, and the soft hum of the city seemed far away. As he sat there enjoying the calm, he noticed someone walking toward him. It was a woman, someone he didn't recognize, but she had a warm smile on her face. She walked up to him and stood for a moment as though unsure whether to speak or not. Finally, she said, "I hope you don't mind me interrupting your evening, but I just wanted to thank you." Keanu looked up, smiling. "Thank me? For what?" "For the story I read online," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm one of those people who sometimes judges others based on what I see. But after reading what happened at the Salon, I realized how wrong I've been. I didn't realize how much my own biases were affecting the way I saw people. So I just wanted to thank you for reminding me that everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are or how they look." Keanu paused for a moment, letting her words settle in. It wasn't often that he was approached like this, especially by someone who was willing to admit something so personal. "It means a lot to me that you're saying this," he said, his tone warm and sincere. "I don't think anyone's perfect. We all make assumptions from time to time, but what matters is recognizing it and doing better." The woman nodded, her eyes brightening. "I've already started making changes. I've been trying to treat everyone I meet with more kindness, without judging them based on what they're wearing or where they're from. It's made a difference in my life already." Keanu smiled, feeling a sense of contentment. "That's the most important thing, being kind and treating people like they matter. We don't need to wait for a big event or a moment of crisis to make a difference. Every small act of kindness counts." They stood there for a moment, sharing a quiet understanding. It was a simple conversation, but Keanu could see in her eyes that it had impacted her in a real way. She wasn't the only one either. He began to hear more stories from strangers who had reached out to share how the Salon incident had affected them. People were beginning to change, not just how they looked at others, but how they interacted with them. It was a ripple effect, and Keanu felt a quiet sense of satisfaction knowing that, in his own way, he had sparked it. But as the days went on, something else started to happen. It wasn't just strangers who were reacting. The staff from the luxury salon reached out to Keanu. At first, it was a simple, heartfelt apology from the receptionist. She explained that after seeing the online post, she had spoken with the other employees and realized just how wrong they had been to judge him that way. They all agreed they needed to do better, not just in how they treated celebrities, but in how they treated everyone who came through the door. Keanu appreciated the gesture. He wasn't someone who believed in holding grudges, and he understood that sometimes people needed a reminder to do the right thing. But what touched him even more was when the stylist who had made the comment about dressing properly sent him a message. The message was short, but sincere. "I just wanted to say that I've been reflecting on what happened that day. I've realized how wrong I was to judge you and make that comment. I don't know if you remember, but you mentioned how we all make mistakes. You were right, and I'm sorry for mine. I promise I'll do better moving forward." Keanu smiled when he read it. He didn't need a grand apology. It wasn't about being right or wrong. It was about growth. He sent a short response, "Thank you. I'm glad we could all learn something from this. Take care." The interaction left him feeling lighter, more connected to the people around him. It wasn't just the celebrity world that needed lessons in humility. It was everyone in every corner of life. Keanu knew that change didn't happen overnight, but he believed in the power of small, steady shifts. And maybe, just maybe, his encounter at the salon had been a small part of something bigger. That night, as Keanu stood on his balcony looking out at the city, he reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about the woman in the park, the messages from the salon staff, and the kindness he had seen in the world in the days since. He had never been interested in being a hero or an icon. He wasn't trying to change the world with one act. He was simply trying to remind people of something they sometimes forgot: the importance of seeing others as people, not as their clothes, their wealth, or their status. It wasn't about grand gestures or making headlines. It was about everyday moments, everyday kindness, and the impact those small things could have on others. Keanu was quiet for a long time, the noise of the city below blending with the gentle rustling of the evening wind. He had always preferred a life of simplicity, but in that moment he felt something deeper. He had made a small difference just by being himself, and for him, that was enough. As the weeks passed, Keanu noticed that the world around him seemed a little kinder, or maybe it was just his perception that had changed. The ripples from his encounter at the Salon continued to spread, and he found himself thinking more and more about the ways people interacted with each other in their everyday lives. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how many little moments there were where kindness could be offered, where understanding could make a real difference. One evening, Keanu was having dinner at a quiet local restaurant he often visited when he overheard a conversation from the table next to him. Two people were talking about a recent event, a charity dinner, a community gathering, and one of them mentioned how the rich and famous attended such events to look good. They laughed about it, almost as if it were a fact of life, something that everyone expected from those with status. Keanu felt a wave of frustration rise within him. It wasn't the first time he had overheard such comments, but something about the way they were said made it seem like there was no room for people to just be themselves anymore. The assumption that all wealthy or famous individuals were doing good deeds for show, or only to gain something, was something that frustrated him deeply. People rarely took the time to understand why someone did something. They only saw the surface, the outer layer of a person's life, and judged them from there. He had always tried to be careful about the way he approached the public. His work was important to him, but so was living with integrity. Keanu wasn't interested in having his name plastered across headlines, or having people see him as something he wasn't. But the more the conversation continued in the restaurant, the more Keanu felt a desire to set the record straight, not with words but with actions. He didn't need to explain his values to people who didn't understand. He would simply live them out. The next morning, he made a decision. He would focus even more on the causes he believed in, but without drawing attention to himself. He didn't want to be seen as a celebrity philanthropist. He just wanted to help where he could, to make the world a little bit better in ways that truly mattered. Keanu wasn't sure where to start, but he knew that making connections with people who shared the same values would help. He called up a few of his friends who were involved in various charitable causes and asked them about opportunities to help in a low-key, non-public way. He didn't want cameras or microphones following him around. He simply wanted to make a difference in his own way. One of his friends suggested a local food bank that was looking for volunteers. Keanu immediately agreed to help. He didn't want any fanfare. He simply wanted to serve and contribute, even if it was in a small, humble way. The day he volunteered at the food bank, Keanu showed up early in jeans and a plain t-shirt, just like anyone else. No makeup, no cameras, just a guy helping out where he could. He spent the entire day organizing donations, sorting through bags of food and talking to the staff and volunteers. What stood out to him most, however, wasn't the work. It was the conversations he had with the other volunteers. They weren't concerned with who he was or what he had done in the past. They simply saw him as another person who wanted to help. Throughout the day, Keanu felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It wasn't about being in the spotlight. It wasn't about being recognized or thanked. It was about doing something good for the sake of doing it. He had always found a sense of fulfillment in giving back, but this felt different. It felt real. It felt grounded. Later in the week, he returned to the food bank again, this time with a small group of friends who were equally passionate about helping. Together, they worked alongside the volunteers, providing meals and packing supplies for families in need. Again, no cameras, no press, just people giving their time and energy to make life a little easier for others. Over the next few months, Keanu continued to volunteer at the food bank, and his actions began to inspire others in the community. The story wasn't spreading through social media or the news. It wasn't about what he had done. It was about the simple message of giving without expectation. of helping just because it was the right thing to do. People who had heard about his quiet involvement started to follow suit. They showed up to the food bank, not to be seen, but because they genuinely wanted to make a difference. Keanu's life continued in this quiet, unassuming way, filled with acts of kindness that weren't for show. But despite his desire for privacy, there were moments when he couldn't completely escape the public eye. One afternoon, while walking through a park near his home, he was approached by a group of teenagers. They were nervous but excited, holding their phones with the hopes of getting a picture. Keanu could tell they weren't looking for anything other than a quick snapshot to show their friends. He smiled, nodded, and politely declined the photo. "I'm just out here enjoying the day," he said. "I don't need to be in any pictures." The teenagers seemed a little disappointed but quickly nodded and thanked him before walking away. Keanu appreciated their respect for his wishes, but it reminded him once again how much of life, especially for people in the public eye, was about being seen, or more accurately being captured. But for Keanu, the most important moments were never the ones caught on camera. They were the quiet exchanges, the small moments where people made real connections. When he wasn't in the spotlight, when he wasn't performing for an audience, he was just another person trying to live an honest, meaningful life. One evening, he had a conversation with a close friend over the phone about how life had been lately. They talked about everything from his recent volunteer work to his thoughts on how the world was changing. The friend asked, "Do you ever feel like you wish people would just leave you alone, that you could live without all the attention?" Keanu thought about it for a moment before responding. "It's not so much about being left alone. It's about being understood. I think we all want that. But at the same time, I've learned that it's okay if people don't understand everything about you. What matters is being true to yourself and treating others with the same respect you want in return. The rest of it is just noise." His friend laughed softly. "Yeah, I get that. The noise is always going to be there. But you've managed to tune it out better than most people." Keanu smiled, thinking about how far he had come over the years. He had always known who he was, but the world had sometimes tried to define him by other standards: his fame, his movies, the way he looked, the things he owned. But Keanu didn't define himself by any of that. He defined himself by his actions, his values, and the way he treated others. "I'm just doing my best," Keanu said softly. "That's all anyone can really do." His friend agreed, and they continued to chat about life, the world, and how simple it was to be kind to others no matter what. As they wrapped up the conversation, Keanu felt a sense of contentment that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a quiet peace, one that didn't require recognition or applause. In the months that followed, Keanu continued to live his life with this quiet sense of fulfillment. He volunteered at the food bank, helped out at local shelters, and did everything he could to contribute to the world without drawing attention to himself. He didn't need accolades. He didn't need to be on a pedestal. He was simply living the way he wanted to live, with kindness, humility, and integrity. And as more people started to follow his example, Keanu realized that perhaps that was the real power of his story. Not the fame, not the headlines, but the ability to spark small changes in people's hearts. It wasn't about changing the world with big gestures. It was about the everyday, quiet acts of kindness that had the power to make the world just a little bit better. The season shifted once again in Los Angeles. Keanu's life, though always filled with the subtle hum of his work and public responsibilities, felt quieter than before. It had been months since the incident at the Salon, and though the story had faded from the headlines, its impact lingered, especially in Keanu's heart. He had always valued a life of simplicity, but lately it felt like he was finding a deeper kind of peace. He had always known that real fulfillment came from within, but now, more than ever, he felt a connection to the world that he had never fully experienced. There was a sense of balance now in his days. The hustle and chaos of the entertainment industry still surrounded him, but it felt like a backdrop to the life he had intentionally chosen. His focus was no longer on the demands of fame, but rather on the moments of genuine connection he had found along the way. Whether it was volunteering at the food bank, having quiet conversations with friends, or simply taking time to reflect during his walks, he was starting to see the world through a new lens. One quiet afternoon, Keanu found himself sitting on the same park bench he had visited months earlier. He was alone, as usual, enjoying the crisp breeze that carried the scent of the ocean. It was a place where he could clear his mind, a place where the weight of his public persona didn't follow him. He was just a man, sitting quietly in a park, observing the world as it passed by. As he sat there, watching the golden sunlight flicker through the leaves of the trees, a young woman approached him. She was carrying a notebook, her eyes scanning the park, looking for a place to sit. When she spotted the empty spot beside him, she hesitated for a moment, then smiled nervously before sitting down. Keanu glanced at her and nodded politely, offering a quiet smile of his own. He wasn't sure if she recognized him, but he knew from experience that it was often best not to draw attention to it. The woman looked over at him, then seemed to make up her mind about something. She took a deep breath and said, "I hope this isn't strange, but I just wanted to thank you for the way you handled everything. I saw the story online about the Salon incident, and it really made me think about how I treat people." Keanu was taken aback, not because she was speaking to him, but because her words were so honest. It wasn't often that someone came up to him with such a direct and thoughtful acknowledgement. He could tell she wasn't after an autograph or a selfie. She was just someone who had been moved by what had happened, and that meant something to him. "You know," she continued, "I've always been one of those people who judges people based on what I see. I'll admit it. If someone's wearing something a little off or doesn't look the way I expect them to, I make assumptions. But when I saw how you reacted that day, I realized I'd been doing that all my life." Keanu smiled, not to show his approval, but to show understanding. "I think we all make assumptions sometimes," he said quietly. "It's easy to do. The hard part is recognizing it and doing something about it." The woman nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "That's exactly it. I've been working on changing how I view people. Instead of assuming things based on their appearance, I'm trying to learn their story first." "Your story helped me see that." Keanu felt a warm sensation in his chest. It was the kind of moment that reinforced everything he believed in. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about human connection and understanding. He didn't need to tell her how important it was for him to hear that. She already knew. The simple, sincere exchange was enough. The woman thanked him again before standing up, and as she walked away, Keanu sat back in the bench and watched her leave. Her words lingered with him. It wasn't the first time someone had shared how his actions had affected them, but every time it happened, it felt like a small, quiet victory, not for him, but for the message that kindness and humility could make a real difference. Keanu often found that these quiet victories were the most fulfilling. In a world that constantly demanded attention, he had come to value the moments that went unnoticed by the larger crowd. The personal interactions, the quiet reflections, the moments when people saw each other for who they truly were. That was where the real change happened. He spent more time now listening, paying attention to the little things that made people feel seen and heard. When he wasn't working, he took time to visit the people who had crossed his path during his volunteering. He checked in with the food bank staff, had lunch with the volunteers, and helped out in whatever way he could. There were no cameras following him. There were no press conferences or interviews. There was only the work and the people he had come to know. One afternoon, as Keanu helped unload a delivery of fresh produce, a young man approached him. He was one of the new volunteers at the food bank, someone who had recently joined the team after hearing about the work being done. He had a shy smile on his face, and there was a nervous energy about him as he walked toward Keanu. "Hey, I just wanted to thank you," the young man said, his voice tentative but sincere. "I read about you volunteering here, and honestly, it's kind of inspiring. I've always wanted to help more, but I wasn't sure where to start. Seeing someone like you do it quietly and without a big show, it made me think that maybe I could do it too." Keanu paused for a moment, looking at him. It was always humbling to hear how his actions affected others, especially when it was a simple act of kindness or service. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "The important part is that you showed up. That's all any of us can do." The young man smiled, clearly relieved. He had expected some grand response, but Keanu had simply acknowledged his effort. To him, it wasn't about being recognized. It was about the feeling that came from doing the right thing. As time went on, Keanu found that more and more people were reaching out to share their own stories of how his quiet actions had inspired them. Some were people he had met, like the young man at the food bank, while others were strangers who had read about his volunteer work or heard about the incident at the salon. In some ways, it was almost as if his life had become a living example of the change he wanted to see in the world. He continued to live his life without expecting anything in return. He didn't need the applause, the awards, or the recognition. What mattered most was how he lived in the world. And by staying true to his values of kindness, respect, and humility, he was helping to change the conversation around fame and success. One evening, as Keanu reflected on everything he had learned over the past few months, he realized something important. The real gift wasn't the way people viewed him. It wasn't the accolades or the admiration. The real gift was the way people changed because of what they saw. The way his actions inspired others to be more understanding, more compassionate, and more willing to step out of their comfort zones. Keanu had spent so many years in the public eye, but it wasn't until this quieter chapter of his life that he realized how much influence he could have without ever seeking the spotlight. By simply being himself, by being kind and humble, he had begun to create a shift, and in the end, that was what mattered most. Keanu stood up from the park bench, the setting sun casting a soft glow over the horizon. He didn't need to go anywhere special. He didn't need to chase after anything. He had everything he needed: peace, purpose, and a life that was truly his own. As he walked away from the park, he felt content, knowing that he had found what he had been searching for all along: the quiet, unassuming power of living with kindness and integrity.